All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for the 9th webinar in our series We Believe Experiences Matter. I'm Pamela Stafford-Gay, Senior Marketing Manager at Centric, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. In today's webinar, Salish Manga will focus on 3 pillars that can be used to drive service design. Director of Centric, Salish welcomes the challenge of coming up with pragmatic approaches that drive tangible business benefits for clients. Before arriving in the U.S. in 2011, Salish was a director of the largest user experience consultancy in New Zealand. Most of his time was spent interacting with clients from a wide range of industries and helping them transform their organizations to deliver world-class customer experiences. Before I hand this over to Salish, if you have questions during the presentation, use the GoToWebinar dashboard and send in your questions, and I'll compile them for the Q&A at the end of the presentation. I'll also be monitoring the chat window, so if there are technical issues, we will try to address those as best we can. If you can't stay for the full hour today, the recordings of all of our webinars are available on demand and can be accessed by visiting usercentric.com. Take it away, Salish.
Hello and welcome to you all, especially to those of you that have joined from countries other than the US. I believe we have attendees from as far as Russia and New Zealand, so welcome to you guys. It's always good to put a face to the name, so here we go. Here I am, although I do believe I have a few more grey hairs than when that photo was taken. As Pam mentioned, my name is Salish Manga, and I'm one of the directors of Centric. As you've probably figured out by now from my accent, I'm not originally from the US. I grew up in New Zealand, yes, the famous place for Lord of the Rings, and now I'm based in the US. So while I was in New Zealand, I helped run a UX consultancy called Optimal Usability. And now that I'm in the US, I help run Centric, and from a project standpoint, I am helping drive the development and execution of service design. Given that we have a number of international attendees, I thought I'd spend a quick minute just providing some context on Centric. Please don't take this as a sales pitch. We are the largest UX consultancy in the US, and we conduct both research and design. Although we are based in Chicago, we do work all over the US, and about 1/3 of our work is global. Over the last 12 years, we've evolved from a usability consultancy to a user experience consultancy and brought in design as a discipline, as it was pretty much demanded by our clients. The expertise we have in research and design led us quite naturally to extending the very same skills into the area of service design. And for us, the key to what we do is having smart people that get the business side of things and also understand research problems and know how to apply the toolkit essentially to these situations. So it's great having you guys attend this webinar, which, as some of you will know, is part of a series of free webinars that Centric is doing this year. And as Pam mentioned, registering for these will allow you to attend and also watch these sessions on demand at a later time. So that's the end of the adverts. We can get into it now. So often people start a presentation by defining what they're going to talk about. I'm going to start by talking about what I'm not going to talk about. So often there's a lot of debate around the term service design itself. There's lots of different names for it. There's debate about whether it's an old discipline or it's a new discipline, or even exactly how it should be done. Even in researching this topic, one of the books I was reading said that if you asked 10 people for a definition of service design, you would get 11 different answers. I still believe it's a field that is evolving, so rather than debate semantics, which yes, it does have its time and place, I really want to draw your attention to focus on some key thoughts and ideas. My real hope would be that you guys can take these thoughts and ideas and shape and experiment with them in your own organisations. So on the slide in front of you, you can see the structure which I'm going to talk through. I'm not going to read that out for you guys. The reason why we are talking about service design And I guess the examples that we've seen in terms of service design being executed is that often it can be adopted very quickly, but then it turns into these large projects that can't be fully executed and don't always provide a return for the business. So our approach is really one of pragmatism. It's dealing with the realities that we face when executing service design projects, and also ensuring that it's worth doing commercially for a business. So during this presentation you'll hear about a framework that we have at Centric, and we'll build up a high-level example as we go, just so you can see how it plays out. Okay, so before we start, I just want to get some idea of the audience, so I'm going to throw a few questions at you. So we'll just see how this goes. Okay, Pam, if you could launch the first questions. So would you consider yourself primarily a service design evangelist, a service design practitioner, a service design believer, a service design skeptic, or what is service design? You should be able to respond. Very good. So we have quite a range of people. We have a good group of believers. We have a few people that are quite new to service design. Very good. Okay, the second question that I have for you is how many service design projects have you done or have you worked on? Very good. So most people haven't worked on any service design projects, and we have quite a few that have worked on 1 to 4. Very good. And the third question is, who is currently working on a service design project? So who's really looking for some practical tips here? Okay, very good. And the last and most important question, do you know where New Zealand is? %. Very good. Very good. That's very impressive. Okay. Alright, so let's get going here. So, we hear a lot about balance in our lives. We hear about balanced diet, we hear about work-life balance, and in the case of service design, we're also going to be talking about balance. In researching this topic, there was a lot of material about designing services or experiences that I guess we believe are out of balance because they primarily focus on making an amazing customer experience only. The reality that we've seen and experienced is that we work in companies that have their own goals, and they also have many constraints. And I think for service design to be effective, we need to balance the experience we provide to customers with the realities of the organisations we work in. So just to elaborate on constraints within organisations, I'm sure you guys, a bunch will jump to mind, but it could be things such as money, isn't it always? Resources, how many people have we got to do all the things that need to be done. It may even be things such as organisational structure. You may have lots of a silo structure where people in some parts of the organisation don't talk to other parts of the organisation. May not have people with the necessary skills, may not have a process. And sometimes you may even get consultants in that provide great ideas, but they just can't be executed in an organisation. So to paint a better picture of the situation we typically see in organisations, we're going to fly to the other side of the world. You guessed it, we are flying to New Zealand. So you all said that you knew where New Zealand was, so this should be no surprise. So more specifically, we're going to go to a place in New Zealand called Auckland, which is the largest city in New Zealand, with a third of the population living there, approximately 1.2 million people. Bet you didn't think you're going to get a geography lesson in this webinar. And finally, we're going to zoom in to a little suburb called Northcote to view a home that my wife and I bought just over 8 years ago. So why are we in Auckland, New Zealand looking at a satellite photo of my house? Bear with me as I attempt to create an analogy that will tie to service design. So here is a photo of my lovely family. Here's my wife Janine and my 2 children, Luca and Nisha. They look so happy, don't they? I'm sure you guys are saying those children look very cute, and yes they are. So some of you may have heard the phrase, happy wife equals happy life, and I am a complete subscriber to that. Part of making my wife happy was to have a home that we enjoyed being in, which is completely reasonable, and something I wanted as well. Unfortunately for us, that required a bit of work to be done. So here is a picture of the back of our house when we first bought it, with its horrible green trim and a ramp for when I get older and possibly need a wheelchair. Behind me when I photographed it, the picture just gets worse. So knowing that we wouldn't live in this home forever, and given that we're early on in our careers, which means little money, we had to be wise about where we invested our money. We wanted to invest money in things that would make our living experience better, but also know that it would increase our home value for when we sold it. So, as you can imagine, we would have to have these discussions. So initially we had to discuss what style of home we wanted, what kind of home aligned with who we were. Some of the aspects we wanted in our home were being able to entertain people, being able to relax outside, kids getting to spend lots of time playing outside rather than being in front of the TV. And we wanted to be a place that we could hang out. So with this in mind, we could start having discussions on where we should invest our money. Janine's first idea was a good one. I'd love a bathroom with this, and with that and a beautiful bath where she could relax and drink a wine and read her magazines and those sorts of things, and she thought it would really add value to the home. I couldn't argue with that, and it totally made sense. My first idea, though, died a horrible death. I was trying to promote a home theatre room because I thought it would rock, but pretty much that got blown out of the sky. We'd spend a lot of money on it, but we just wouldn't get the return there. Another discussion involved us getting insulation in the roof cavity and under the floors, and that also made sense because it would make the house cool in summer, warm in winter, and reduce our electricity costs. Hopefully you get the idea here that as we went through this discussion, we're trying to figure out where should we put our money to create a good experience for us while we're there, but make sure that we are investing in the right areas. So essentially we had to decide what would make the biggest impact to our home and what would be the best investment. So just a picture in terms of, so back to the back of our house and our crappy deck, we turned it into this because that was one of the areas we focused on. So what you see there is a nice large deck, or patio as they call it in the US, with outdoor couches and a grill, and this also helps me show off my building skills. The deck looks pretty good. But as you can see, it was just focusing our investment in the right areas to balance, I guess, the experience we wanted, and also making sure the long-term value in the house was there. So with that analogy in mind, I think it translates pretty well to the typical situation we see in organisations. So just like we were trying to balance the family experience and the money we had available, in a business we want to create a great experience for customers, but we have limited budgets and resources, and as a business we definitely want to be investing things that make a return. So more specifically for a business, that might look like, so you wouldn't be bathroom insulation or home theatres. It might be, you might be looking at online, you might be looking at a call centre, you might be looking at a point of sale system. And of course the items we could look at could be more granular than what I've described here. So, since I can't see you all and I don't know whether you're nodding or shaking your heads, I'm going to throw in a question here. Does the analogy make sense to you, and can you see how it translates into the business world? So we'll just launch that question. And if no one answers, I know you've gone to sleep. Okay, excellent. Most of you said yes, and the others, it will make sense as we go along because we will go through an example. So the challenge we have here is, as my wife and I were trying to decide where we would invest our money to create a great family experience, we could sit at home with some wine, we could look at our home as a whole, and we could craft a plan. It isn't quite as easy in a business. There are complex structures, there are more people, and generally you don't get to have wine. So to tackle this, let's try and break the problem down a bit by defining what some of the key challenges are. And this is based on our experience. So to start with, it's useful to have a framework. Frameworks generally help us to think through situations in a logical and structured way. And having a physics background, I like logic and structure. So let's walk through this. So one of the biggest challenges that I've certainly seen in terms of service design is the silos that exist in organisations. Different parts of the organisation can operate quite independently. They have their own staff, they have their own budgets, their managers, and also their own incentives which are specific to them. What is done in a particular area can be done in complete isolation from other parts of the business. But in reality, there's quite a disconnect with how our customers interact with the business, where a lot of interactions can actually, a lot of journeys that customers have can actually be multi-channel. The second point I've got there is a key one for this presentation. This point deals with the reality of constraints. There are always things that you can improve in an experience, but not all changes are equal. How do you figure out what really matters to customers and make a difference to the organisation? So these are the two key challenges that we're going to focus on today. I know there are other challenges, but these are the big ones which we're going to try and break down and hopefully we can make some progress with. So the slide you're about to see takes those two key challenges and overlays this framework that we're going to use. So the framework you see, the diagram you see on the left, is an aerial view of three interlocking pillars. The interlocking part is important because the pillars go hand in hand. The output of one becomes the input to the next. The first pillar I am sure you are all familiar with. It's the second two which are often not part of a service design approach. That means you can easily end up with large and wieldy projects and very little output. Typical service design approaches present lots of opportunities, but you can't do them all. In fact, we believe that you don't need to do them all. The method we will talk about will help identify what matters most and where you should put your effort. I will go into each of these pillars in more detail, and as I go we'll build up an example. The example is loosely based on a project focusing on a tablet experience, and I'm deliberately going to keep this at a high level and also lo-fi because I want you to get the concept and not focus on the details. Alright. Just going to launch another question here for you guys. The question that you're about to see is, who has constructed a customer journey map? Okay, we have about a 50-50 split. Very good. So most people, even if you haven't constructed a customer journey map, you would be familiar with the concept of a customer journey map. If you research service design, you will get to see many forms that communicate at very different levels of granularity. The phrase we apply to mapping is that it allows us to explore holistically but act locally. Now this is important when working with a siloed organisation where you've got compartmentalization to some degree. Now, before when we talked about our challenge where you have multi-channel experiences in siloed organizations, we actually have some goals in mind when structuring the map. So let me just walk you quickly through how we think about structuring the map. So initially, in terms of the purpose of the map, this is how we look at it. So often I'm surprised at how little is known about the interactions that organizations have with customers. Often there can be a view from an organization which is more process orientated from the organization's perspective, or it's too fragmented to get any real insight. Mapping is a great way to get the lay of the land, see what is really going on, and understand the interplay between the customer and the different parts of the organization. It provides really good context. Obviously, as in point 2, you get the multi-channel view, but I also like the last point here. It helps capture research in a useful and meaningful way. Often you have multiple research activities, and rather than looking through lots of data, this allows some level of synthesis. So let's see how we might construct a map. So maps can take all sorts of different shapes and forms. They are not one size fits all. The key thing is to know your audience and what you're trying to communicate to them. This will affect the structure, the boundaries, and the granularity of your map. As an example, we could take a look at the experience a customer has with a tablet from pre-purchase through to ongoing usage. Along the x-axis, we would put down the key stages that we would see as the structure of the experience. As well as the stages, this axis can often have a time component to it. The actual steps that you put out there may change over time as you discover more about your customers. You may even add stages or remove stages, or even get more granular. With this in mind, don't be afraid to start with a draft based on what you think it is, and then change it as you discover more. As I've done with this example, you may want the fidelity of the map to reflect your level of confidence in what is being presented. Sketch for guess, full detail and fidelity for solidly researched. Okay, the y-axis. Now we're tying this directly into that objective of how do we drive change into the existing structure of the organization. So on the y-axis, you should focus on your organization and possibly even outside influences. The group that is related to your organization should reflect the structure of your organization in some way. Now the reason we say this is because it's important later when you go to communicate to different parts of the organization about what is happening with customers and what changes need to occur. They are typically interested in what it means for them. So seeing their own areas and how customers are interacting with their own areas is pretty critical. So along this axis you may have online, you may even divide it into tablet, mobile, call center, a retail store. You've kind of got some choice as to how you might divide that up. And also at the bottom you may wish to put secondary customer components such as needs, emotions, might even be key activities that they're currently conducting. Alright. Key thing that you want to make sure you're doing here is what are you trying to communicate and how do you paint a strong picture for your audience. So overall, when you combine those two, you essentially create a structure. When you map out the journey of a customer, it'll start allowing you to explore the experience holistically, and it also helps you start seeing very obvious issues that you may want to resolve. I can go into a lot of detail here, but I actually want to focus on the next two pillars, and we'll build up this map as we go through the example. So we've talked about mapping very briefly, and we'll build that map up as we go, but the second part I want to talk about is measure. So this is really about identifying weaknesses in the experience. Now, you can call it identifying weaknesses or identifying opportunities, whatever it is. But this is a very important piece of the puzzle. So rather than being opinion-based, the measurements start adding strength to what you're trying to do. It helps you to be objective. Our business at Centric is all about measuring and changing. and that's precisely what we're applying to the service design discipline. So if we get into specifics, the measurement component allows you to measure the experience of each component, which in turn contributes to the overall experience. One question as well, what do I do to get this sort of information? So one way you might be able to do this is through a survey. So I went through something like this for a restaurant that my lovely family and I ate at last weekend, and got this invitation to provide feedback, and being a researcher I felt I should respond to their request for feedback, and I assure you it had nothing to do with the free meal on offer. So they sent me a survey, and although I changed a few things on the survey, they broke down the whole dining experience into its components and assessed my satisfaction for each part. The design of the survey was almost like reliving the entire dining experience and being able to assess it as I walked through it. Looking at the aggregate data, not only from me but also the other respondents, they could then start seeing where there were weaknesses in the experience, or alternatively opportunities. So as well as measuring each component and identifying weaknesses, this also creates a baseline of measurement. So when you make changes to the experience later on, you're in a position to show the impact you made. As service design is a discipline you integrate over time, being able to communicate positive change to the rest of the organisation with data is going to be a very important factor. So let's go back to our loose structure we created for our map. And initially we might start by drafting a customer journey map based on our understanding of the experience, and then we'll change it as we get more data in. So as I said before, measures may be from surveys, there might be some interviews just to get a bit more in-depth information, or there might be some observational research to begin with just to understand the flow that customers go through. This should be enough to ensure you get some output without investing too much time or effort at this stage. Also, you may overlay any existing data you're collecting, and then between that and the measures you have taken, you should have enough to understand where some of your problem areas might be. Some of the problem areas may be really obvious, and others may actually be quite a surprise. At this point, you don't want to go overboard with your data collection, just to get some pointers to the problem areas. So what we don't know with this picture is why problems are occurring. We only know where they are occurring, and this is where we need to deep dive into these problem areas. Deep diving is all about understanding the why. So it's really about capturing more measures. You may have more qualitative techniques that you use here, and in that, the research toolbox, you may be using interviews, you may be using group sessions where you walk people through the experience that they've had separately, but then you start pulling out, the commonalities and the differences between their experiences. It may be through testing, it may be longitudinal studies. There's a very broad toolkit that's available there, and it's about choosing the right ones to answer the questions you have. So there we go. So as we measure and as we deep dive, we can take our initial draft and start increasing the fidelity of the map that we've created. We're creating a richer picture here. We're starting to communicate more items to the audience. So we've got the existing data we may be collecting. That might be web analytics, it might be measures that you're taking for your in-store experience, and we're applying it. And essentially what you'll see in that map, which is a little bit simplified, is that you have green dots representing the areas where the experience was looking pretty good. You have the orange spots, which are reflecting the areas where there are some issues, and then you've got a couple of red spots where you're likely to have some major issues with the experience there. And as you can probably see there, you start seeing that setup in particular seems to be having the core issue. Okay, so that was kind of covering the measure component. So we're going to take this story on now, and the last pillar that I had was around prioritization. So far in mapping and measure, we have had pretty solid approaches that aren't overly subjective. Prioritization, though, is different. This is a lot more subjective than the other two. One of the challenges we talked about at the beginning of the webinar was determining which parts of the experience to focus efforts on to get the best ROI. One of the questions that I hope you're asking at this stage is that ROI can be both tangible and intangible measures. So for example, we could talk about tangible ROI being increase in revenue, it could be increase in conversion or reduction in cost. It could also be less tangible ROI such as loyalty or brand awareness. In this section, we'll be focusing on the tangible items, but there is a place for the less tangible items. So as I mentioned, prioritization is important because it shows us where to focus our limited resources. Rather than making the perfect experience, this approach proposes that we prioritize the effort on parts of the experience that drive tangible business outcomes. In order to do this, we need to introduce cost of making changes and also the benefit that we would expect to gain. Now, as you can imagine, both of these involve some level of guessing. Perhaps we'll call it predicting to sound more scientific rather than guessing. But overall, we want to make sure that ROI is a key part in deciding where to improve the experience. So let's go back to our example, where we have identified some possible focus areas. The setup process seems to be causing the most difficulty, but it has opportunity for improvement in 3 different channels. Online and the call center seem to be the worst. Remember that there was also a step to deep dive into each of these areas and understand the why. What is going on here that is causing problems? Going through the process of understanding why gives us insight into what we might change to remedy the situation. With this information on hand, we can start determining potential ROI to help us decide how to prioritize. So here is a simplified view of what you can do. For each of the identified focus areas, we can take our baseline measures, of which satisfaction may be one, which is what I've put in that table as the current measure. Based on our understanding of what needs to be done, we can predict the impact on what that measure will make if those changes are made, and we can also associate the costs involved. Now, as I said before, this is where the subjectivity comes in. So you're not going to get it perfect, but the key is making sure that you have the right level of granularity to allow you to separate these different activities that you could do. So this step is key in optimizing the experience in a way that impacts real business outcomes. As you can see, it's not about creating the perfect experience, nor is it about touching everything that could be improved. It's all about focusing your efforts on what really matters. From a commercial standpoint, you also stand to gain better support from C-level people when they know that you are doing things that impact the business in a positive and measurable way. So tables are great for, I guess that's one representation. Here is another representation that you could use for the information in the table. The axes would allow you to map the investment from the business or the costs, and the impact it could be something such as profit. And then you could use the size of dots, and they would reflect the improvement in experience. You can visualize the data in many different ways. Once again, the key is understand your audience and know what you're trying to communicate to them, and then choose a method of communicating which is going to convey that the best. Right, so I know we've hit this at a pretty high level, but hopefully just walking through that example has given you some idea of some of the key steps in approaching service design in a pragmatic fashion. So let's just recap some of those key points. Here's the key things I want you to take away. So first of all, we talked about balance. most situations, we have existing experiences, and turning them into perfect experiences is just not realistic. We need to optimize the experience by balancing the benefit to the business with the benefit to the customer. So balance is a key thing here. Secondly, we talked about two key challenges, and these are two challenges that we've seen a lot, where you have multi-channel experiences and they are being delivered in siloed organizations. And the challenge is, where do we focus our limited resources? On the left-hand side, you can see a framework that maps to these key problems that we've identified. And it shows you how these three interlocking pillars work and allow you to approach service design in a balanced and pragmatic way. And lastly, in terms of the process we follow, it should generate you a list of activities in a prioritized way that will create a better world for your customers and make your managers smile a little more. So I hope you found that useful. I hope you've got one or two things that you can take away and add to what you're doing, and I am more than happy to answer some questions if you have them. And I will answer what I can as they come through, or if I get some, you can also see my email details there, so if you have some questions, feel free to fire them through, and I'll be more than happy to answer them after the webinar. So one question that's come through: if I wanted to start doing service design in my organisation, where do I start? That is a good question. In fact, I think service design can be such a daunting, big task that that often you can get paralysed and not know where to start. I think the key thing is set yourself up for success. So I wouldn't choose something that is too big, or choose the biggest project you can. Choose something where you know there are some obvious issues as well as some subtle issues, and ring fence that where the interaction may be across two channels or something. But I would start with something small, start with something that you can turn around in a reasonably short space of time and that you can demonstrate success. Then being able to communicate that to other people will kind of build confidence that you're doing the right thing, and then you can move on to bigger and better things. We have another question. What would you consider a critical skill when conducting service design projects? Another good question. Okay, so I think we've talked, we talked about the toolkit, we talked about user research skills and all of those sorts of things. To some extent, I think those are almost hygiene skills that I would expect for someone, for a team that is approaching a service design project. I think the key skill that comes to my mind is actually facilitation skills. So as you can imagine, and as you all know, working inside organizations, you'll be dealing with lots of different groups of people. You'll be managing expectations. We'll be communicating lots of different messages. So I think being able to facilitate groups of people, to extract where people are at, and to know how you need to communicate back to them is absolutely key. So along with, I guess, those core communication skills, I think the ability to facilitate sessions with those different groups is absolutely key. We have another question, how to predict the results when designing services which do not exist yet. Very good. I guess there's two ways you could probably approach this. The question is, are there any other service, if we assume we're just dealing with some kind of service, are there any other services which are, I guess, close to what you are designing? So there may be things you could compare it against where you could take measures and actually apply it across. if that is not a possibility and it's something quite unique, you're going to have to start somewhere. So you just have to pretty much put a stake in the ground and set some expectations. I don't think, whenever you start new services, even if you're developing a marketing plan, a sales plan, the first you have to take a guess and then you start measuring. So the key thing is make sure you measure, and then as the results start coming through, you can reset your expectations. Another question has come through. Does service design always have to be applied to the whole organisation, or can you narrow your scope to just an aspect of the organisation? Very good question. I think relating back to that first question, if you want to start doing service design, where do you start? I think I remember one of the first service design projects that I did, I actually narrowed it down to cover 2 channels, knowing that it actually went slightly broader than 2 channels. So I guess the short answer is yes, you can apply it to, you can narrow the scope down to just an aspect of the organisation. I guess the challenge is you need to be sure that if there were 4 different channels that were part of this overall experience, that you chose the 2 channels or 3 channels that were the major contributors to that experience. You've just got to make sure that you're not missing a very big piece of the puzzle. Alright, I've got some more questions coming through. Are these questions together? Okay, those are the same questions, alright. How do you prioritize the experience for multiple customer segments whose economic impact is fairly similar? Another good question. So, so what we've got here is, in terms of the, if we go back, actually I might even go back those slides. Okay, so you should be able to see this slide now. So in terms of the benefit to the organisation, you may have no difference there. Where you may see a difference is actually in the cost of implementation. So the cost of implementation to address one segment might be quite different to another. So for example, if you think about frequent flyers, you might have multiple segments in there, but in terms of those doing long-haul flights over those who are doing short-haul flights, to address any of the issues in the long-haul flights is typically significantly more expensive than those if you're doing domestic flights. So it may actually be a cost factor that actually impacts your prioritization rather than the benefit. So I guess, like I was saying before, we've got the customer experience side of things, we've got the benefit to the business, and also the cost to the business. So we've got 2 factors on the business side and 1 on the customer side that we've got to play with. So I'd focus on the cost side, and if those are even, then flip a coin. Okay, another question. In your experience, how much time do companies tend to invest in benchmarking their customer experience? Oh, that has a lot of different answers. I think it's hard to answer that, because I think it's different for different companies and even in different industries. I think what I can speak to, though, is the trend that we're seeing is that more and more companies are having to, or are wanting to, justify the investment that they're making in their businesses. And I think measurement is becoming absolutely critical in terms of proving that the investments you're making do have a return, in terms of communicating to senior people that all the stuff that you're doing actually is making a difference to customer experience, and that is resulting in benefits to the business. So I think benchmarking is actually becoming more important, and more companies are tending to do it. So I hope that answers your question there as well. And I think we have one last question. Any tips for advocating service design within an organisation and justifying customer experience research versus marketing spend? Oh, that's a good question. I think with service design, as I said at the beginning, I think it's still, I think it's at a low level of maturity to some degree in organisations, which mean you can say service design, but people don't understand what it is necessarily. So I think a great way to advocate service design is by example. So when I talked about where do you start, and I talked about utilising a small project where you can demonstrate value and show quick wins is a great way to advocate it. I think customer experience research, one of the benefits of that in terms of the approach we've laid out here is the ability to measure. So I think we can directly show that you have an experience here, we're going to measure it, we're going to drive change in a pragmatic and focused way, and we're going to show the improvement. I think marketing spend, it kind of depends what the marketing spend is on, but the customer experience stuff is all about behaviour, and the behaviour, we're tying it directly to business outcomes. Marketing might just give you some areas to focus on, but I think we're a lot more concrete in that user experience space. Alright, so thank you all for attending. The recording of this presentation will be available on SlideShare, YouTube and Vimeo with links from our website, which is usercentric.com. We'll tweet it when it's live, and once again, saw my email details, and feel free to contact me with any questions you may have, and I'll be more than happy to respond. I hope you all got something out of this. Bye.